welcome to this week's episode of Tell Me More. We're in the studio without Luke. He's in Canada. We'll talk about that. But we're talking, Dr. Wiles and I, about assessing your reality, kind of a you are here moment that happened in Ezra and Nehemiah, but also needs to happen in our lives. So it's a good conversation. We're glad you're here. Okay, we're in the studio. It is Tell Me More. It is Monday. It is Monday morning. And so we're checking some boxes. However, today we have an empty seat.
We do.
There's Dr. Wiles, as you can hear and see. I, Katy Reed-Hodges, am here. But our friend Luke is on a plane right now. Mm-hmm. He and Ashley and Michael Glenn and Ryan Chandler. Mm-hmm. Think about that. Mm-hmm. It's not a duo.
Quite a group.
Yeah. Yes. What would you take those four to do? I think I could take almost any mountain with with that group, but they're headed to Canada.
They are.
Montreal first and then Toronto, I believe, to do, I guess you'd call it a vision trip. Mm-hmm. They're exploring what we might do with partnership in those places. And maybe we could bring some of our people to be formed by the Canadian Baptists and what's going on in a post-Christian context and how we could learn. And anyway, I'm very excited for them and for our church. And I think it could be really fruitful trip. Mm-hmm.
It's a part of our Ascent network, which is a new movement that we're part of, and they're going to be connected to our Ascent family in Canada.
Do you want to awesome. You want to say any more about that since we have a captive audience?
Well, it's a new movement of centrist Orthodox Christians.
And they've heard us say that, right? I mean, I guess I don't want to be
across North America.
Yeah, but okay, let's start like you don't know anything. It's Ascent, Ascent, Ascent.
That is correct.
Like the ascent of Jesus, but also that we are on the rise, right?
We are.
Am I capturing that?
It comes from the. We've embraced the Psalms of Ascent as you're preparing to go to Jerusalem to prepare to be the people of God, to be in the presence of God, but also the ascension of Jesus, that we have a role to play before he returns. After his ascent, we have to be his people on this earth.
So it's a new network, movement, what do you want to call that, of churches, not just Baptist.
Churches, seminaries, pastors,
like-minded,
centrist Orthodox Christians from across North America. Yeah. And our goal, our desire, our heartbeat is to re-evangelize North America with an eye on reaching the whole world. So it's pretty exciting. I've been a part of it now for several years, but it is launching off the ground, and efforts like this are beginning to emerge. And looking forward to it. We'll say stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yeah, literally, we're staying tuned to see in a week what all our coworkers are bringing back as far as information. So pretty excited about that. But that means this morning we're going to have to go on without Luke.
Yeah, so it's back to just me and you. This is how this thing started.
It is. We were across the hall.
That's right.
We weren't on camera.
Correct.
But it was us. We didn't have these cool mics. We had something dinkier.
I know. We didn't even have Addison.
We didn't have Addison.
She's here with us now. Did we have Luke? Was Luke?
No.
It was just you and I, but then Luke has.
I don't even know if Luke was on staff
that's what
yet.
I mean. He's brought a new dynamic to us, and
and it's good, it's helpful, and we would like him back in this room. But for today, it's just us, and that's okay.
Look at us. And this is, and it was your idea. So
this was my idea.
You're the one who kept saying to me, "What if we do a podcast?
What if we do a podcast?
And we could call it Tell Me More."
And we could talk. Yeah, you got it right.
So far, my question was, when would we do it? How could we do it?
My big
I know nothing about it.
My big question was, would you do this every week?
Right.
You, D-Dub. Would we really be able to get a time slot on your calendar every week? And so I think its success is mostly due to your commitment to it, I would say. So
I love it.
Thank you.
I'm glad to do it. Glad to be part of it.
110 episodes in or whatever we are. Thank you.
So we're already planning our 200th episode.
It's going to be awesome.
Oh my gosh.
Mark your calendar.
You've got to be kidding
2026.
Yeah. It's going to be great.
Okay, that's all we know. Somewhere in 2026.
It'll come right after 199.
Yeah, that's about all we can say.
Yeah, and we'll enjoy it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's good. So I want to ask you a few questions about your sermon yesterday.
How about it?
How are you liking this series?
I love it.
What do you love about it?
Well, first of all, I love the fall. I always feel like the fall is just a great time to re-engage, mobilize, get back into the rhythms of life.
Summer is so disparate, right? People are everywhere doing
Which I
everything.
love too. I love that break, if you will, of kind of your normal.
Do you love every season at First Baptist Arlington?
Pretty much. Every season that I'm is my favorite. Because I'm
pretty sure when the fall chapter closes and Missions Month opens, you're not going to not love that. And then in fact, when that month closes and Advent opens.
Yeah, Advent's my favorite.
I think you're going to, and then comes January, where we're launching a whole new
It's a whole
thing,
brand new year, which is my favorite.
Yeah.
And
you're
like Easter,
you're the Buddy the Elf right now.
Which is my favorite. Yeah.
You're Buddy the Elf, and your preaching series are a candy shop, and you're just loving it. So that's a good thing. We want a pastor who's pumped to be in the seat.
But I do love the fall. I do. And then,
back to the fall.
But
and so I guess what's more helpful is, what do you love about the fall?
Yeah. Well, I just
season.
like the changing of the season. I like like I said, the re-entry, if you will, into rhythms that are, I think school has a bigger impact on our society than we all even realize, because you think some people who are older who say, well, I don't have any children in school. Yeah. But even if you don't, if you have grandchildren or even activities, everything is kind of built around a school calendar. It just is what it is.
Right.
Even
we have a lot of that.
So
even our traditionals ministry here
exactly
would build in a lot of that.
And so it's I just love it. And this particular fall, of course, I was praying about this, last July.
Last July is when you would have kind of started mapping out this sermon series.
That's right. Okay. And I just had this sense that with the whole concept of being together, which is our theme, I wanted to address this fall the conversation about what does it mean to build or to rebuild. And Ezra and Nehemiah, to me, offer some really great lessons on that particular topic. And I knew it has been a while since I personally have engaged Ezra and Nehemiah, and I'm just assuming it's been a while since most of our church members have.
I have already confessed to you that I have not read it since seminary.
Yeah, it's not a very...
Since it was assigned to me to read.
It's not a very popular part of the scripture, so
but
to
it's
speak.
really good.
It is. It's fascinating. It's a great time in history.
Even what you read Sunday in Nehemiah, it's just this account of, like, I guess, riding a horse around this city. It's just it reads like a novel or it's a narrative story, and it's really compelling.
Yeah. It's some of the most engaging writing, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
That's
what I'm trying to say. It's surprisingly, and I think I told you, I don't think this is on here, but I caught up when we were on an MLT retreat last week, which we could talk about in vague terms, but not about, anyway, I don't want to camp out too much. But we had a break in the afternoon, and the weather last Monday and Tuesday was fantastic.
Beautiful.
Perfect. And so I went and sat outside and caught up on the first 4 chapters of Ezra, because that was our Bible reading, and I confess I got behind. And so, because I was on vacation that first week anyway. But it's so engaging, and it's so fascinating. There's a line at the end of Ezra 3 that was like, I'm going to misquote it, but you got it. They're starting to rebuild, and you hear the cheers of the young, new people who didn't know the old temple. And you have the old guard who's just wailing because they knew what it used to be, and they're sad. And there's this line that basically says, and nobody could tell the difference. Like, all you heard was just like rapturous noise, and no one could really tell.
What a great line.
The screaming from the rejoicing. And I'm like, the Old Testament's cool. Yeah. It's a good, it's just well written. And honest.
And it's a great moment in history. We're going to actually talk about it next week, when the temple's rebuilt. And you do have the younger folks who've never seen the temple. Yeah. And they were just so excited. Yeah. And we now have a temple. And you have some of the older ones who remember Solomon's temple, and they were like, this is not as good as one we had. And that's kind of interesting generational intersection. I know. We'll take up next week.
Yeah, y'all talk about that next week. We're trying to decide if next week has special guests. Yeah, I'll tease that.
It might.
It might. But today it's just us. Nothing special about the guests in this room. No offense, Addison. But okay, so Ezra is really well written. Again, if you haven't read it, it is part of the Together in Word and Deed assignment. But to read through it it's really good, and I don't think you'll regret it. And it's actually, to me, easier to get through than even some New Testament writing. That can be a little more tactical.
Just storytelling,
It is. It's good stories. In fact, there's like letters within it. I wrote this, and then they wrote this back, and well, then this is what I did, So anyway, it's really fun. But okay, I think fascinating and very difficult. Not for you to preach necessarily, but for us to take heart and then implement this 4-point sermon that you had, or 4 instruction. It wasn't really a 4-point sermon. Right. It had 4 points of instruction. Right. And so can we just walk through those?
Let's do.
Is that how you want to spend this time?
I'm happy to.
Okay, well, we'll start there and see where it goes. But so basically the context is that in Ezra, Joshua and Zerubbabel acknowledge the reality of life.
That's right.
And so I would say that would be the key thesis to this sermon.
That's right.
And it's the call for people to acknowledge the reality of their life right now.
Correct.
And then you extrapolated that for our church also. You kind of did some hints.
That's correct.
of maybe we need to be doing that as a corporate body, acknowledge where we are right now.
Exactly.
And then, only then can you rebuild, right?
That's right. And then there's some personal lessons that come from it. Because when you think about the Temple of Solomon in particular, I mean, it was just at the heart of Judaism. And I would just imagine, as best we can tell, the people of God could not imagine their life without it. And so it was so central to everything. Every Jewish male was supposed to go there at least one time in their lifetime. You wanted to be there for all the major festivals at least once in your lifetime. And when the northern kingdom was destroyed a couple hundred years earlier, the southern kingdom, primarily Judah and Benjamin, obviously Levi, because Levi's tribe was woven into all the tribes, because the Levi's family didn't get land. They were the priests, so they lived all over. They just believed that God would protect them, even though they were hearing Jeremiah say to them, you've wandered, you've lost the real understanding of the temple. It's become too ritualistic. You've lost your heart, and God's going to judge us for this. And so they just somehow believed that the Lord would miraculously protect Jerusalem, and he for sure would protect the temple. And so when Nebuchadnezzar comes in, this pagan king, and destroys the wall and tears the temple down and plunders all the goods from it, that's a shocking reality for them. That was hard for them to accept.
I think that's helpful, like as we look at this as a narrative for our own life in the rebuilding part that we'll eventually get to. What's happened to the Israelite people is something that they literally thought could never happen. Not just would not.
No, just couldn't. Not impossible.
Right. So like in our own life, I guess as a care minister, pastorally, in our own life, I guess we have some of those things. I don't even know if we would. I mean, honestly, we can think about things that would never happen. Like surely that wouldn't happen, even though they could. But I don't even know if we have a category of things that like that can't happen.
Right. Yeah, it's almost hard to relate to.
Yeah, like emotionally we can't go there. Like, I can't imagine something happened to my children, or, I don't even want to.
Right, of course.
For those listening, I don't mean to trigger anything, but I know really that could.
It could.
But
That's right.
The temple being torn down because you thought that was, God had brought you into that and God had gifted that.
And he had made himself known in that spot on planet Earth.
So there is no way.
There's just no way
that God would let that.
That's exactly right.
Happen.
Correct. Because even a Jew, you couldn't even go in certain places in the temple.
Or you die.
That's right. So it just
because you weren't holy enough.
That's exactly right.
I mean, and then it happened. I think like we don't understand, and there's not a book in the Bible called the Babylonian Exile. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
Like there's a book in the Bible called Exodus, and so I think we learn that as kids. But there's not one book that explains this one thing.
If it's called the Exile, maybe we would understand it.
That's what I think. That's what I'm.
Because it really hasn't gotten enough press in our theological brain.
And that's why I think I'm camping out there, because I think in our day and age, and Addison's nodding because she's listening, which I think is fun. Our 24-year-old. Are you still 24, Addison? 23?
Whoa, come on.
Lower. Okay.
Come on.
Our 23-year-old camera person who grew up in our church and has been in Christian culture, as have I at 38 still. But I just didn't grow up learning a lot about the exile.
Right.
And so for an increasingly biblically illiterate church, sorry, everybody, it's true. People might not even know the fundamentals of like.
That's right.
Even the Exodus, sadly, even though that's a huge book that we're walking through on Wednesdays, but certainly the Exile. So yeah, I'm kind of giving it an elevated place just in like the scope of the Old Testament, that although there's not a book called the Exile, it is that important and that
it is
shaping to Israel as we know it in this rebuilding. But it's you have to actually pay attention to the chapters in which it's referenced, or you'll miss it altogether.
Correct.
So anyway,
because if you read the story of Daniel lived in the exile. But what happens to us when reading Daniel, we love the stories at the beginning of Daniel, the lion's den and Daniel standing his ground against the king.
And then it gets really weird.
But then you get all this apocalyptic literature, and that's what everybody gets captivated by with Daniel. And they forget, I think some people do.
No, I think you're right.
That actually there is an incredible traumatic experience that Daniel and Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael, all these people have experienced, and that is their homes. Their spiritual capital has been destroyed. The temple of God has been destroyed, and they're now living among a bunch of pagans who are trying to reshape them and reorient their whole life. So Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael get new names. They're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
Well, those are Babylonian names. Those are not their name. They did not call each other that. That's what the Babylonians named them.
The VeggieTales calls them Rad, Shack, and Benny,
okay,
which is how I learned them.
Which
only extrapolates what I've already said about just
exactly right.
how my culture, my generation is learning.
The trauma of the exile and what happens even when, think about the separation of families, the brokenness that occurs. Then you get to Babylon and you get this message from Jeremiah who says, when you get there, go ahead and plant farms, grow, have children.
But you're
and they're thinking to themselves, why would I have children? I'm not going to raise my children in Babylon with all these pagans.
Yeah.
We just don't have any children.
Yeah.
But the problem was, if you're going to survive as the people of God, you got to have children.
Yeah.
And you got to find a way to live. Mm-hmm. And then unbeknownst to them, God has Cyrus, the king of Persia, in waiting, and he just overruns the Babylonians. And Cyrus has a whole different way of ruling. And he decides, he believes he can rule his empire better if people are in their own homeland and have their own religion and live their own lives as long as they pay homage to him.
Yeah.
So he tells them, y'all can go back home. Well, they don't all go. Mm-hmm. Not everybody goes, because it was one of those moments where
it wasn't 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them had.
Yeah, it's been a long time. That's right. It's been a long time. They've been living there for a long time. And so, you go, it's about 50 years from 586 BC to 538 BC. Mm-hmm. So you got 50 years of life. A lot of them have died there.
Some of them did marry.
Yeah. I mean, married, of course. Yeah. They're living their lives. And so when he says go home, well, some of them did go home. Yeah. But not everybody did. And the reason we know that is because you fast forward 100 years and Ezra and Nehemiah are still in Persia. They have not gone home. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this whole group of Jews who are still living in exile, even though Jerusalem is beginning to be rebuilt. So it's a fascinating time in history. And what I love about it is it sets the stage for the New Testament, because we're 400 years before Christ. We're going to close the Old Testament with these guys. Mm-hmm. We're going to end with Malachi in that era, and then we're not going to hear another word until Jesus. So this is the temple that Jesus is going to walk into. This is somewhat, in some ways, it's the cultural setting that Jesus is going to be influenced by what happens during this particular period in history. So it's a pivotal time in history. I think it hasn't gotten its due, really.
That's what. Yeah, I think so too. Obviously, and I think we need to pay attention to it. Yeah. There's a lot to learn from it.
I believe there is.
Even just like such a sweeping. And what am I trying to say? Yeah. The metaphor is so strong that we have a lot to learn from it, and we shouldn't just skip this series.
I mean, creation in the Old Testament, obviously, the Exodus, the exile. Those are the three big events that really govern the theology of Israel. And
would you put the fall when you? I'm opening. We're out of Ezra now, so apologies. Yeah. We'll get back to it. When you say creation, would you put the fall in there?
Yeah, of course. In other words, God created everything and placed it all in exactly how He wanted it.
And then it went
Humanity fails, and of course you got the choice of Abraham and his descendants. All that's woven in there to me. Yeah.
So creation up into like Abraham starting his journey.
Correct.
Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then you have the Exodus, which is the dominant story theologically for the Jews, because they celebrate it all the time. They talk about it. I mean, they have the Festival of the Tabernacles.
Right, I was going to say the festivals, you've been informed by it.
Everything. Yeah. It's like you can't get over that.
Which, again, if you want to learn more about Jesus, and I know the people listening to this, I'm kind of preaching to the choir.
We are.
But I think if you want to understand Jesus, like he shows up at these festivals.
Of course.
Well, why do they have the festivals? Yeah. Read the Exodus. I mean,
exactly.
It's all
exactly right.
tied together. Like Jesus shows up to the Festival of Booths, to the Tabernacle, which has a lot of light imagery and says, I'm the light of the world.
Right.
Like,
so he's standing there at the temple at the end of his life, and he says, one day these stones will all be torn down. Well, every one of those disciples are thinking, well, I don't think that's possible, but it has happened before.
Yeah.
So that's in their mind that, actually, a pagan emperor did come in here and tear this down before. Yeah. Whereas if Jesus had been saying that about the Temple of Solomon, they would have all said, well, that's just not, come on.
Yeah.
God would never allow that. Even as hard as that was for them to believe in his lifetime, they had in their minds that Nebuchadnezzar had done it. And those were the stories they learned when they were children. And so they knew about the Exodus. They knew about the exile. It was just woven into who they were as people. Yeah. So, and even when you're studying Old Testament theology, you need the narrative, because these theologians that write about it all, they talk about pre-exilic, post-exilic. And so they just assume that you know the stories so that they can have a theological conversation with you. So that's why I think it's important to know these stories. So anyway,
let's get back into this.
I just felt like, okay, it's been a while since we've probably discussed this. I think the exile, to me, Another reason that I chose it is that I feel like it has connections to the pandemic that we've been through. The sense of we're in this really strange land. We're not really sure what to do with it. We believe there's life on the other side of it, but it's probably going to be really different. And so to me, it connects with us on several levels. And so you've got in the early part of Ezra, the story of Zerubbabel and Joshua, and they are looking at the rubble of the temple and saying, okay, they didn't have the tools. They didn't necessarily have the resources yet. So they just said, all right, we need to start somewhere. Look at how bad this is. Let's just rebuild the altar. And even with that, there were people who were saying, no, you can't do that. And that's why the text says, even though they were afraid of the people who were going to oppose this, maybe enemies in Samaria and other places, but also even, I think, some of the broader Jewish family, not sure these people were even authorized to do this kind of thing.
They just weren't.
Yeah. And so, you guys have been living in Persia all this time. They were coming here and rebuild the temple. So a little question there. And then you fast forward almost 100 years and Nehemiah shows up. Well, you got the temple. The law is being restored, but the people are still, they're just not holistically healed. And Nehemiah rides around and he comes back and he says, well, we've got to rebuild the city. We've got to rebuild the wall. We've got to restore the integrity of this community. And it's time to admit that we have not done that. And the way to remind yourself of it is just walk around the valley. Jerusalem's on a hill, 2 hills actually. And he's looking at all the huge stones laying down in the valley that Nebuchadnezzar had left. And he's just saying, okay, y'all, we can't just keep living like this. We've got all this rubble. Somebody needs to honestly ask the question, what are we going to do? So it's a pivotal moment in history to me. And I think it gave me an opportunity to then allow our people, I guess, to start thinking about their own lives. And what happens when you're at a place where it's time to rebuild? And unfortunately, sometimes the need to rebuild is due to our own poor choices. That's why I wanted to tell the story of Thomas Terrence Sunday.
Nothing happened to him. I mean, I'm sure he had influences, but it was his own agency to get him into that.
He made these decisions. He decided to become a KKK operative. He decided to become violent. He decided to somehow get involved in sending what he would consider sending these messages across America. And not only that, I didn't tell the full story Sunday because it's gruesome. He was a violent person.
Tell us more.
Well, he had submachine guns in his car. He had all kinds of weapons.
It's evil.
Yes. And so when he realized he knew once he heard gunfire, he says in his book, he knew he'd been sold out. Somebody had told the FBI this is what's about to happen. Because it wasn't like there was just a policeman sitting there in a car. There were like 30 people, 30 FBI, Meridian police officers. And what's crazy is rather than him giving into the situation and realizing, okay, this is crazy, he just decided to make a stand. And so his accomplice gets shot in the neck. She dies and he realizes she's dead in the car. So he just unloads and starts with his weapons. He starts firing at these police officers and these FBI agents. And he's by himself, 1:00 in the morning in Meridian, Mississippi.
He doesn't surrender.
And he's not going to surrender. No. And he takes off running. Well, once he shoots a couple of them, well, police officers, it is what it is. They're like, okay, you're not going to survive this. We're not taking you in handcuffs. You are armed and you are trying to kill us. And so he gets shot numerous times. It's a miracle that he lived, actually, when they finally cornered him. And it took him a long time. And they had, and you can imagine when they took him in to do surgery on him in Meridian Hospital. Well, you had surgeons there who had to decide, just as an act of humanitarian grace, we're going to try to rescue this man's life. Even though he was known as the most dangerous man in their state, and he was full of vile and hatred and anger.
That's where that Hippocratic Oath kind of kicks in, right?
Yes. And so, but in retrospect, many of those people were Christians, and they happened to be in those particular professions, and they're going to have an impact on him that he didn't even realize at that moment. And so, but he was having to rebuild his life because he's sitting in a prison cell by his own doing. But there are many other situations in life that our people find themselves in, as you know, as a minister here on our staff.
Sure.
Things happen. And all of a sudden, here you are. You've lost your job. Just like we kind of have a running joke, me and one of the guys in our church, because he and I used to see each other at Steinmart. It was just kind of this little kind of random store we had here in Arlington. There were a bunch of them. They were all over. So you had all these people who worked at Steinmart. Pandemic hits, and for some reason, I don't know all the details, but Steinmart decided they wouldn't do online stuff. They just weren't going to sell their products that way. Well, guess what? They went under. So every employee, everybody lost their job. And there were, I don't know how many, several hundred of those stores around America, and all those people lost their jobs. Not because they weren't doing a good job, not because they weren't managing their stores well, they weren't treating their customers correctly. They were financially responsible. The decisions above them that were made, all of them lose their jobs. So now all of them are released back out of the workforce, and some of them were older, because I remember going to the Steinmart I went to, so I always wondered what happened to all those people, because there was nothing they did wrong. And so there are. But
they're still going to have to rebuild.
That's right. And even though they didn't do anything wrong. That's what I mean. There are things that just happen in your life, and
sometimes it's hard to parse out.
That's right. You could have triplets. You could be living your life and you decide you want to have a baby. You're praying about it. You're trying to decide what needs to happen in your life with you and your husband, or your husband and wife.
Right.
And then you find out you're pregnant. You're not just pregnant, you're pregnant with triplets. Well, that caused an assessment of reality for you. Did it? And as I remember.
You were there.
Or, you can think about it. You can go through a health crisis. Something can happen. All of a sudden something shows up, and then now you're no longer able to do what you used to be able to do. Right. So now what are you going to do? Yeah. Or you retire, you say, okay, I talked to several people at church yesterday who told me, okay, I'm older now. I've retired. Yeah. I'm kind of reassessing. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm grateful for this conversation you're having with us, because I didn't even think about the fact that I'm really rebuilding my life, but that's actually what I'm doing. So,
on Wednesday nights we have Grief Share, Divorce Care, Cancer Support, and they all meet on the same hallway. And that whole hallway, I would say, is about rebuilding. It's particularly grief share and divorce care, because you're on the other side of whatever just happened, and you've got to decide, where do I go from here? Yeah, and life looks completely different.
Just as a commercial, what about Wednesday nights at First Baptist Arlington?
Pause.
Time out. You need to tell us about that, because if I'm an adult at First Baptist Arlington and I think I may go down to the church tonight and eat Wednesday night, what can I do?
Yes, well, eat early. The meal's from 5 to 6, and because all of our programming starts at 6, so that simplifies it as far as getting here. Come in any entrance. They'll all have greeters, or they're open. 6 p.m. Here's what all starts at First Baptist Arlington. The kids have programming. The youth have programming. So if any age, you can be here. So we'll start with that.
All your kids.
And we'll help you find that. But for the adults, if you're having to make a decision on what to do, there are like 6 things you could be doing. One is what I just mentioned. So if you're going through those specific things, a cancer journey, grief, divorce, we have something for you. Starts at 6. Anyone is welcome any week. Does that make sense? It's not just, except this week is actually our last cancer support. So come tomorrow or Wednesday, or, go to something else. The Art of Parenting, led by Ryan Chandler, is for all parents, not just young family parents. I think that's an important distinction that he wants people to know about. But it is actually grown out of its space. It's going to meet in the chapel this Wednesday night, which is always a fun problem to have. Where do we meet? So the Art of Parenting for any parent is in the chapel at 6. Physically, okay, let's go across the hall. Crochet Corner is happening in the Welcome Home Center.
Which has been amazingly successful.
Amazingly successful. I think it proves a point that sometimes people just want to be together. Not that crocheting is important, but it's the community and the fellowship you have to be together. And so Crochet Corner is in the Welcome Home Center. They can teach you how to crochet. I bet you don't have to bring anything with you. You can just start from zero. Speaking of other activities, Pilates is happening in the gym, the Flex, at 6 p.m. as well. All age, just show up in gym clothes and they'll teach you what to do at Pilates. And then Luke and Ashley are leading us in a missional living class. And so if you just want to think through how to be effective missionally in your life and be on mission, as we would call it, or living the Jesus way out wherever you are, Ashley and Luke are leading that. And that's all. Everything I've described is mostly on the first floor of our church, except for Pilates in the gym. And so I don't think I missed anything.
It's a great Wednesday night.
It's a great Wednesday night.
Or you just come hang out. That's what
choir,
some people do.
If you're musical, choir and
orchestra.
Band.
But some people just hang out in the cafe.
Oh, yeah, the cafe's open. And so you can eat what the menu is for the meal. And if you want to pre-register for that, it's all online. I think at FBCA.org/midweek, but if I'm wrong, you can click around. And right. But there's a meal. And then if you don't like what's on the meal, you can get something off the menu in the cafe. Just take a little bit longer.
So on Wednesday nights, pragmatically,
yes, sir.
Talking about rebuilding. If you are in that category of someone who's been divorced recently, or someone who's had a death in their family, or they're facing the challenge of cancer, whether it's a family member or
it's for anyone. The way the tagline for that is anyone affected by the cancer journey.
Right.
Because sometimes you just need support because you're supporting someone with cancer.
Correct.
We have people in the room that are related to someone with cancer, but that person's not in the room. So that helps you know the scope of who can be in there. But anyway, go ahead.
So, well, those are all people who are, as you said, who are engaged in the journey now of rebuilding. And so I love that that's just a very practical thing.
But at some point they have had to, and just to get back to what we're talking about, if that's okay, because it's a commercial over. Okay.
Yeah.
I hope I.
But we are sponsored by First Baptist Arlington, so
literally
it's okay.
Everything you see, everything you see is bought by. I'm not bought by anything, but I am.
We are sponsored by, supported by First Baptist Arlington.
Supported, financially supported. But this is financially supported. This
Absolutely.
I'm pointing to things if you're just listening. But this iPad is financially supported by First Baptist Arlington. So yes, but I would say that everyone who is down the chapel hallway, but honestly, even if you're there for Art of Parenting, you've decided you need help. So that could be a rebuilding in itself.
That's exactly right.
But you've made, so that's probably a next week conversation because you're already there and you're doing the rebuilding. This week's conversation is you've decided you need some help,
right.
And that's where the honest assessment, which I think is sometimes the harder work. I think people do more like from the care. It's hard for me to take my care hat off in this conversation, particularly. People probably do more internal work and struggle before they call the therapist or before they show up to Grief Share because they've realized the low point is maybe before Terrence, Thomas, Dr. Terrence gets to the jail cell. That's the low point is when you're getting shot at, and then it's like, oh, I've got to change, or maybe the jail cell is, but like it's anyway. The first session of Grief Share counseling or divorce care or showing up is probably the rebuilding effort that has come out of what we're talking about today, which is I'm actually going to map this out and realize that I need to change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think that can be the harder work.
Yeah, I think the assessment is crucial.
Yeah.
As I said Sunday morning, you're not delaying anything. You're not denying. You're just analyzing. Yeah. But I think, as I said Sunday also, once you do the assessment, honestly, to me, it's hard to embrace it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry. It's allergy season.
It is.
But I think it's the embracing of it, though. That's where the "you are here" rug comes in.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this really is where I am. It's not where I wish I were.
Yeah.
That's why I said Sunday morning, you can't start from where you wish you were. You have to start from where you are. And that requires your willingness to embrace and accept, okay, this is where I am, And
do you think that there's moments that help us do, like, I think sometimes something has to happen where you say, okay, I really am here. And I didn't even realize it. You know what I mean?
So. I do. I think sometimes things happen.
Even in our church life, and I don't want you to give anything away that you don't want to, but, we can be bopping along and not even realize that something isn't working anymore or needs to be reassessed until something happens. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like I don't want to say anything in here that we haven't said in advisory council
Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please do. Because I think there's some tangibles. Okay, thank you.
Here's a good example. When we were prior to the pandemic, we were noticing that there was lethargy on Wednesday evenings. There just seemed to be something missing. We weren't sure what it was, but the way we knew it is because the attendance diminished over time. Talked to some parents about things for their children. Yeah. People were very busy. There were all kinds of issues. Then the pandemic hits. Well, obviously everything stops. So when we come out of the pandemic or begin to emerge, one of the things that we talked about as leaders was, okay, less but better. Let's not just relaunch everything.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what exactly needs to be relaunched, what needs to be put aside, and something new needs to happen. So, well, it took a while for Wednesday nights because we decided to not do anything for a while. There was just there was nothing to do unless you were a part of the worship ministry. For the most part.
Very quiet Wednesday nights. Maybe some committee meetings.
Correct.
But I mean, not programmatically.
Exactly. So then began to talk about, what about my Bible study that I've led I have taught the Bible on Wednesday nights longer than you've been alive, so it's just what you do on a Wednesday night at the Baptist church. I've done it forever. Well, we weren't doing that. And so we talked about it and decided, well, what if we move that to Wednesday at noon? And the pastor's Bible study will be then rather than in the evening, because a lot of the folks that were coming, just in all honesty, were older and They didn't necessarily want to be out that late at night for a number of reasons. And we said, what if we can build some community around that? So we do that on Wednesdays. Still no programming though on Wednesday nights. Yep. It's choir. And one of the reasons I know that is because my granddaughter, Ada, loves Wednesday nights. And so I would actually bring her, we'd feed her, and we had just kind of a special childcare just for the people that were in the choir or the orchestra.
Got it, for their kids.
And so I got grandfathered in, kind of pastoral privilege to let Ada go to that. Because she wanted to be here. So that was it.
Wednesday.
That was all we had. And so, and I'm not diminishing that necessarily, but the point was we just had not come to grips with what to do. So finally, we did an honest assessment.
Yeah, and that's something happened to trigger that. Like something has to be running. It can't be great.
Right.
It's harder to do an assessment on something
that's exactly right.
Okay.
You got it.
It's easier when it's actually the pandemic completely killed this thing.
So we had to go, okay, what are we going to do now? Well,
but
then you add new staff members.
I think that kind of thing can be hard for our church.
It's really hard.
To assess something that's not totally dead.
That's right.
It's
really
easier
hard.
when those are. But you're right. So the rebuilding was we got these new staff members. They had vision and energy.
They started asking questions. Well,
why do we do this?
When can we do this? Well, why can't we try this? So last year, we toe in the water, so to speak. We started something primarily for children called Masterpiece Electives, and very minimal offerings on Wednesday evenings. Still assessing, do people want to do this? Is this really the right thing to? What wasn't working? Why wasn't it working? What were we not doing? And so you bring this team together. You were a part of it, and the next thing you know, there's a lot of energy. They're like, well, you know what? We could do this. We could start that. We haven't really done this before. Well, what if we do it this way? And then the next thing you know, we take cancer care.
Yeah, because at the same time,
share.
the Sunday afternoon thing, they wanted to try something new as well.
That was all on Sunday afternoons,
we wanted to do
and that was not working. And so consequently, we get to September and we launch midweek. And both Wednesday evenings, we've had somewhere around 400 people on our campus on Wednesday nights. And we don't even do college anymore on Wednesday nights. They now are on Thursday nights.
Yeah, they're Thursday.
So just pull them out now. And so, which was one of the big things we were doing.
Right, one of the most
nights.
Consistent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now it's been moved to Thursday.
Yeah, that and our youth ministry never stopped.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. So, well, now it's just, when you're here on Wednesday night, the place is alive. There are all kinds of people from all walks of life here for all manner of reasons. And it's productive and it's meaningful. And it's a good example to me of rebuilding something that we weren't really sure what to do. So as a church, we're beginning to assess a number of things, just trying to be honest about where we are, particularly, I would say, emerging from what the pandemic has done in our culture. But just personally, when you can embrace the reality of the situation and you are willing to admit you are here, to me, that may be the most crucial step in rebuilding.
I think so too. I think so too.
It's hard.
So not to get too personal, but also it's tell me more. So like we can do that. But Ryan and I went to the beach with his family Labor Day weekend. So that's like 2 weeks ago, I guess. And I think I've told you I truly think it was one of the first times that I have been calm. I'm not calm, but we had a break. Like the kids were healthy and safe at home, and we didn't bring them. So that was a secure part of my mind too. I wasn't worried about my kids, which is a different day-to-day reality for me.
Yes, absolutely.
The beach was lovely. Ryan and I had a lot of time just to like sit and read by ourselves. But I think I actually had like a break for the first time in maybe 2 years. 2 years of chaos with triplets, because there'll be 2 in November. Anyway, and I think a lot of things caught up with me emotionally. And we've talked about this because I was like, oh gosh, as you all know, and I've talked very openly, my uncle died in June, all the family dynamics that come with that, just the reality of triplets and the whatever comes with that, grief, loss, also joys, and several other things just all have kind of caught up with me. And I had to do this like, here I am, and I don't even think I realized it. And I think that's probably why I'm trying to emphasize, like, usually something has to give for you to have a really honest, like, oh, yeah, I'm here. Maybe I want to be somewhere else, not like physically. I mean, well, that might be true too. But I remember Jack Goodyear, so enough about me. When Jack Goodyear talked to our college students years ago, I had him come speak on MLK, the Sunday of MLK weekend, just to emphasize the great work of Martin Luther King Jr. That, again, the further we get away from it generationally, the less people know about it. So come just tell us about his life. And anyway, and he was talking about racial reconciliation and your own role in that. And he did like you are here. Sometimes you just have to start with where you are. And he said, you get on the scale and it reads a number you don't want it to say. And you can say, well, that's not me. And he said, but the scale's looking back at you, telling you that is you. And I think that's really helpful, because when you look at you are here, you can easily say that's not me. But if the scale's saying it is, then that's where you start, on whatever journey you're on. And so I think I had a hard but important "you are here" moment maybe 2 weeks ago, and I'm in the steps of figuring out what does rebuilding look like. And more emotionally for me, my life isn't going to change. I mean, I don't have any intent. I need to say that to my boss. I don't have any intent of big triggers like that or pulling any levers like that. Right. But what needs to continue to help me rebuild just as a new, different Katy. Not. When I got here 9 years ago, I was single and in my 20s. That's right. Well, very clearly not either of those things anymore. So,
Yeah. And that is a great testimony. And I think what the last point Sunday morning was resolve. That's what you're praying for.
Might be the hardest thing, right?
Is for resolve to emerge now and then figure out how to use that resolve.
Yeah. And I think that's like I was saying earlier, that's the telephone call to the therapist, or that's the showing up at grief share.
That's right.
Or the
I'm going to do something.
Yeah, or the sitting with a financial counselor. Like it's that the resolve to, not just dial the number but hit call.
That's right.
And or the resolve to figure it out, because you might not know exactly what that is yet. But yeah, that's kind of what I think. Those first steps. So yeah, in here, I'd like to acknowledge those are very difficult things, but every person has to live this. This is the path. This is the human experience. There's no way to avoid hardship.
Right. And the rebuilding is a journey. It's almost like you have to just kind of keep doing it. You're having to evaluate and be responsible and be thoughtful. But there are major moments of rebuilding. It's kind of what we're focusing on right now. And I think when those happen to us, you're looking for these various steps that we've talked about. Obviously, pray first. We talked about that Sunday. Neology, remember?
I do.
We want to start there. Yeah. But after you've prayed and you've really asked the Lord for wisdom, then it's time to assess. And once you've assessed, that's next week.
It's good. So our assignment for this week is figure out your reality.
Exactly.
Not just where you want to be, but where you really are.
Stand on your rug.
Stand on your rug. But also do it together.
Absolutely.
Do it in community.
Yes.
That could sound like you got to figure this out by yourself.
Yeah, no. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
Good. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank y'all. Come to midweek. There's my commercial break for that. Good to see y'all. We'll be back next week, and we'll talk about the actual rebuilding process.
Correct.
Also difficult. All right. Thank y'all. Have a good week. Thanks for listening to the Tell Me More podcast today. You can subscribe to this podcast on your app of choice, or you can visit us at fbca.org to find out more information about the podcast and our church. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.